Hello again, and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. Today we will be updating the final round of CONCACAF qualifying for the USA for World Cup 2022. Before the round, we did a team preview and a player preview for each team. We won't be repeating all that information here, but we do urge you to check out those podcasts at our website at soccerfiles.captivate.fm. So let's summarize the information covered in each of those earlier podcasts. We gave a more detailed summary in our first podcast of this series, which was for Canada's team.
Yeah, so we'll reduce that a little bit here, but you can check out that podcast for a full summary. We gave some information on the country, geographically, its location and population. Then we moved to a summary of their history in World Cup competition and in regional competition, with a particular focus on their recent history. We took a brief look at their players, especially their goal scorers. That was in the team podcast, and of course, a more detailed look in the player podcast, and their rankings and head-to-head record with other teams in the group. Finally, we had a discussion of the schedule and their prospects in the team podcast.
Yeah, for each of the player podcasts, we organized the team into positions and looked at the players who had been filling those positions in recent times. We gave some biographical information on them, specifically their history with the national team, and predicted who were the main candidates for each position. Again, in this podcast, we won't be repeating all of that. Rather, we will be looking back on how this round has gone for each team and how correct we were in our predictions of their performance and their players. Sometimes we were right, but sometimes players we expected to be used were not, and new players also came in.
Right. And so I hope listeners view this as kind of a companion podcast to that other one. As we said, we gave biographical information on the players there, but this time we'll only do that for new players that have come onto the scene.
That's right. And finally here, we will look towards the future and discuss the prospects of teams and players from this midpoint forward. So let's begin. Here we'll be looking at USA after 8 games.
Okay, well, the USA started with 2 draws and were tied for 4th place after that, which Americans were not happy about. But then they won 4 of their next 5 games, things really turning around, actually, for the second half of Honduras, because I believe they were down 1-0 at the half there, and came back with those 4 goals in the second half. Is that right, Connor?
Yeah, I don't recall, but I do know that they have had some comebacks for sure in this round.
Yeah, whether they got all 4 goals in the second half, I'm not sure, but it was a real turnaround for them there. However, they did lose in Panama, and despite winning their games at home, they also tied in Jamaica. So they only have 1 win on the road against Honduras. And if Americans are surprised by that, I'm not particularly, because they do seem to struggle on the road.
Yeah, so after 8 games, the USA sits with 4 wins, 3 draws, and 1 loss, which is good for second place. So far, a point behind Canada in first and a point above Mexico in third. Do you think Americans will be happy with that so far?
I think they'll be happy with the result, but not so much with the performance. I mean, there are a few performances to be happy about. But, even that performance against Honduras, the first half was kind of worrying there. And I do think Americans will be disappointed with the road record, which is disappointing, but actually not that different than other qualification runs, especially the Hex, the final round, which is now 8 teams. How about you?
Yeah, I think if I was an American fan, I would be a little bit disappointed so far. Of the teams on the road, they lost to Panama, which I think was a disappointing result. Then they tied El Salvador and Jamaica and beat Honduras. But those 3 teams are the bottom 3 teams. So, they were dropping points on the road to teams that, are near the bottom. I mean, Jamaica, El Salvador, and Honduras have 2 wins between them, from their games, and America was dropping points there. So I think they'll be disappointed with that. I think they would have expected more points in those games, and like you said, more points on the road. The home performances have been good. Beating Mexico 2-0,
Yeah.
was a really important game for them. Kind of off to I'd say a bit of a rocky start. That was a really important win, and sees them going into the final 6 games actually ahead of Mexico.
Yeah, so yeah, they certainly will be happy enough with second place. They probably expected that if they were going to be in second, it would be behind Mexico rather than Canada. But it's going to be tight at the top.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And USA has to go to Canada and go to Mexico. So those will
yeah.
be important games for them.
Right. We'll talk about that actually at the end of the podcast when we look into the future. Let's take a look at some of their scorers. A bit of a surprise there at the top corner.
Yeah, Ricardo Pepe leading the way with 3 goals. Brendan Aronson has 2, and then it's a handful of players with 1 goal, including a couple of defenders. So, the scoring is well spread out. 12 goals in 8 games, not bad, but perhaps a little underwhelming. Would you agree?
I would, and I think they would like to see a bit more from the forwards. I mean, they're happy with Pepe, but he's new to the team, as we'll see. So from some of their older forwards, they haven't gotten much production and kind of experimenting with those guys. They also have a red card to Miles Robinson. That was in the game against Mexico, so he missed the game against Jamaica. Is that a 2-game suspension there?
If it was a straight red, it's usually more than 1 game. I'm not familiar offhand. It may be a second yellow coming late, but coming as late in the game as it did, it really had no impact on them.
Yeah, not for that game, but maybe for the next, because Miles Robinson has become an important defender for them, as we'll see. So let's talk a little bit about formations. This is going to be a lot easier than the Canada podcast, which kind of had a different formation every time. For the USA, it's 4-3-3 all the way.
Yeah, very consistent. The players have changed, but the formation hasn't. Head coach Greg Berhalter really sticking with that formation.
Right. Okay, well, let's move to the player section of the podcast, and we'll begin with kind of an overview or a theme. And do you want to take us through that, Connor?
Sure. So in our previous podcast, we portrayed USA as having something of a selection dilemma, having used a B team in the Gold Cup, which proved successful in terms of the result. They won the Cup. More so than in terms of performance, we questioned whether the manager would remain loyal to the A team that played in the Nations League final round before the Gold Cup, or whether he would rely more heavily on the Gold Cup squad. One commentator in the Gold Cup surmised that 1 or maybe 2 of the starting lineup there would make it to the A team for this qualifying. So we'll have a little bit of a look and see how that's turned out.
Right, and you really made a point of saying in that initial podcast that the USA has really not played many games with their A team. They had those Nation League final games, but they haven't done qualification like some of the lower teams, Panama, Canada, and El Salvador, who actually honed their team a little bit through the previous rounds.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the manager, because we've kind of questioned, I think, the constant rotation that we've seen. Although the team has done well in terms of results, as measured by their second place in the table, some performances have been poor, which have led to calls for the manager's head. I think probably more of the sober fans consider this premature or even ridiculous. It does reflect the difficulty he has had navigating team selection in particular. Frankly, some choices have been baffling and led to criticism, especially the weak midfield in Game 3 against Honduras. which required 3 substitutes at halftime to turn that game around, as you mentioned, as well as a weak lineup in Game 5 against Panama, a game which they lost. That said, something of a starting 11 has begun to take shape in the last 3 games.
Interesting. Great. So Greg Berhalter remains, but maybe is a bit unpopular with some fans. In the initial podcast, we were really wondering whether they were going to start with Zach Steffen or Matt Turner. And do you want to take us through the goalkeepers?
Yeah, I think the goalkeepers illustrates the selection problem well. Again, we speculated whether the manager would choose Matt Turner, who performed well in the Gold Cup, or Zach Steffen, who was really the A-team keeper and who is on the roster of the illustrious Manchester City. Berhalter chose Turner for the first 5 matches and then switched to Steffen for the last 3. Steffen was not selected for 4 of the first 5 matches, so not in the squad, but he was out with coronavirus for 2 of those. Selection of substitutes is a bit more interesting. In most cases, they've only had 1 substitute keeper. It was Zach Steffen or Matt Turner, whichever didn't start. But for the first 3 games, it was Ethan Horvath, and if they had a second, it was Sean Johnson.
Yeah, sorry, that is Horvath. And those guys have had some experience in Gold Cups. I can't call it up right now, but they both had a bit of experience. America is never really at a lack for goalies, are they?
No, they've had some great goalies. A lot have played in the Premier League, as you have with Zach Steffen now, and it does seem to be kind of a 2-horse race. But interesting that he's kind of, gone between the 2 of them.
Yeah, it is very interesting. So actually, really illustrated our question well of whether he would go with the Gold Cup squad. Certainly, more than one of them has made inroads into the squad. Let's take a look at central defenders, and we noted that Miles Robinson got a red card there against Mexico, which was unfortunate because he's been the primary defender. He's a player who made his reputation in the Gold Cup, and he's played 6 of the 8 games, of course suspended for Game 8 because of the red card in Game 7 against Mexico. The defenders accompanying him has really been a mix and match. Pardon me. Starting with veterans, Tim Ream for Game 1 and John Brooks for Games 2 and 3. Both have been off the squad from Game 3 onwards, though. And Brooks took a lot of criticism for his play. After that, it was a mix and match amongst Miles Robinson, Walker Zimmerman, and Christopher Richards. Mark McKenzie, who had started as a left back in the 3rd game, was also drafted in as a central defender for Game 5. Notably absent, though, was Aaron Long, who has been out since May 2021 with an Achilles tendon problem. So they may be looking at him when he recovers to come in and accompany Miles Robinson. Meanwhile, Matt Miazga has not appeared on the squad since the CONCACAF Nations League games in June, so he made no appearance at the Gold Cup.
Right, we'll move on then to left backs. Previously, we said they had little here beyond Tim Ream, the team having tried out a number of alternatives but not really settling. We saw Anthony Robinson was the next most likely candidate. Tim Ream, as we saw above, appeared only as a central defender in Game 1 and was never used in the left back position. Here, several players were tried, including Serginho Dest, who's normally a right back, George Bello, and Mark McKenzie. But Berhalter eventually seemed to settle on Anthony Robinson, who started there in 4 of the last 5 games. Sam Vines, who held the position in the Gold Cup, suffered a collarbone fracture and was out for the first 6 games, but did make it to the bench for the last 2.
Okay, so a lot to choose from there. And we'll move on to right backs. Connor's already mentioned Sergio Dest, and that is the position that he seems to be he's coded for that position. The position of right back also shows a lot of uncertainty. DeAndre Yedlin started games 1 and also started the last 2 games, while Serginho Dest started games 2, 4, and 6. Tyler Adams played game 3, and it was Chanel Moore in game 5. So perhaps Sergio, sorry, I keep saying Sergio, but it's Serginho. Serginho Dest is the number 1 choice there. He was actually injured for 3 of the games, including the last 2, where Yedlin DeAndre held the position. Tyler Adams is actually a defensive midfielder, so he's not really a candidate for the position. Shaq Moore held the position for most Gold Cup games, but on the A team, he's a bit of an outside candidate, and he wasn't even selected for the squad for 6 of their 8 games in this qualification. A final name is, or a couple of names, is Reggie Cannon. Reggie Cannon has often held the position, including for 2 games in the recent Gold Cup. He was injured for the first 6 games and only on the bench for the last 2. Nick Lima has not appeared for the national team since 2019. But I got to say, with Serginho Dest and DeAndre Yedlin there, it's hard to see either of those 2 guys becoming a starter.
Yeah. I guess we've kind of talked perhaps critically about the uncertainty in the positions. I guess on the flip side, do you see it as the USA having a lot of depth there and kind of using their full squad, or how do you make sense of Berhalter's choices in the defensive positions?
I mean, in the one we just discussed, it seems to be more driven by injuries. I can't really see any reason why Tyler Adams would be going back to play right defense. But to that question, I would say he hasn't gotten things together enough to be maximizing their use of depth. But I think they certainly have it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it is surprising the rotation. Some injury, some coronavirus. But these are very important games. You're playing a couple games in a row. Trying to find a rhythm. So it's a good problem to have lots of candidates, but I think it does speak to perhaps not finding the best team so far.
Yeah, and props to us because we kind of identified that as a bit of a theme going into this, and I would say they still really haven't sorted it out. But again, injuries plays a role. Kristin Pulisic, who's coming up here, for example, is a good example of injuries kind of driving the team selection.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue into the midfield, and we'll start with defensive midfielders. So, in our original podcast, we neglected to mention Tyler Adams, which was a bit of an oversight. Actually, he plays for RB Leipzig in Germany and is a big player there. So probably a name we should have mentioned. He had played in the CONCACAF Nations League games, but had been absent before that and then was not in the Gold Cup. However, he was the captain for most games here and the defensive midfielder in the middle of the park for 6 starts.
Yeah, that's really a surprise because he actually never has played in a tournament before.
Yeah, but seems to be making the position his own now.
Yeah.
James Sands replaced him in the center for Game 3 when Tyler played left. Tyler Adams played at right back, as you had mentioned. Kellen Acosta was in the center for Game 5, which was the only game Adams didn't start. That was the only appearance for Sands, but Acosta started 2 other games to the left of Adams in a 3-man midfield. Various other players, often more attacking players, who will come to shortly, filled the position to the left and right of Adams. Among defensive midfielders, Gianluca Busio, who held the role in the Gold Cup, got his only start there in Game 8, the final game. And then Michael Bradley, we should mention, he was captain and a stalwart defensive midfielder for them. He's not appeared since October 2019. He's 34 years old, so looking like he's off the team.
Yeah, we had a good discussion about Michael Bradley in the first podcast, and I don't know. I kind of feel he would benefit the team, if not as a starter, as a kind of a veteran on the bench.
Yeah, I do agree with you there.
All right, well, let's move on to central midfielders. And players listed as central midfielders also rarely fill out the three-man midfield that the USA usually used. Sebastian Leggett started 2 games and Christian Roldan none, though they were regularly called up to the squad and came in as substitutes, each appearing 4 times. We're going to see that it was more attacking midfielders who filled out those spots. But before we look at the attacking players, before we look at those, sorry, I've completely lost my semantics and syntax and everything. It's gone.
Yeah, we'll go to the wings. I think that's what you would have said.
That's what I was thinking in my head.
Yeah. So we'll start with the left midfielders. USA invariably used a 4-3-3 lineup, so the wide players may have been used as midfielders or forwards. So we'll basically proceed according to kind of the normal listed position of the players. Kristin Pulisic is the captain of the team, but he started only 2 games, and that was mostly down to fitness problems. He was not in the squad for the first game and was listed as out with an ankle injury for 3 others, returning from that one only as a sub for the last 2 games. He did start some of the earlier games as left forward in games 2 and 3.
Right. Okay, on then to the right midfielders. And a name that I'm not very familiar with has really come into the scene, but we'll get to him soon. After some experimentation, the default lineup in the midfield ended up being Tyler Adams in the middle, playing a more defensive role, with Weston McKennie on the left and Yunus Musa on the right. So Musa is a bit of an unfamiliar name. To me. He's never played in a tournament, and he's been with the team since just 2020. He plays for Valencia in Spain, though, and seems to be becoming important on the US squad here. That lineup that I mentioned became settled in games 4 and 6 and 7. Musa started on the right in the last 5 games, so he seems to have nailed down the position. And we saw above that other midfielders fill in when those players are not the starting lineup. Weston McKennie is listed as a right midfielder and started game 1 there, but then played more on the left. If you recall, Connor, he was not selected for discipline reasons for some games. I think it was COVID violation, was it?
Yeah, that seems to ring a bell. I do remember he wasn't selected.
Yeah, and I think what happened there is that, he did it once and got a warning, and then kind of did it again, which they were very upset about.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Brendan Aronson played as a midfielder in game 1, though he was otherwise a forward. Paul Areola is listed as a winger. He also played only as a forward, and we'll look at those guys in a bit more detail shortly.
Well,
we'll look at them now.
Well, yeah, we'll move into the attacking midfielders and outside forwards first before kind of looking at the out-and-out strikers. So the outside forwards in the 3-man attack are generally attacking midfielders, while the central player, is listed as a forward. So in the first game, the outside forwards were Giovanni Reyna and Conrad de la Fuente. Reyna was out with a muscle injury for the remaining games, while de la Fuente became a sub, then on the bench, then off the squad by game 4. So kind of curious. Reyna does, though, seem likely to be a consideration once fit. Various combinations were tried after that, involving Kristin Pulisic for 2 games. Paul Areola had 2 games. Josh Sargent had 1 game. And then, of course, Kristin Pulisic's injury and absence kind of complicated things further. After trying various combinations, it seemed to settle into Brendan Aronson and Tim Weah as the outside forwards, and they were used for the last 3 games. Brendan Aronson had started the first game as part of the midfield line, but was the most stable player in the forward line after that, starting 5 of the 7 remaining games. Timothy Weah was injured for the first 3, a sub for the 4th, and then starter for the last 4 games.
Great. All right, well then let's move on to forwards. And the team tried out various players in the centre forward position until rather quickly finding and settling on the 18-year-old Ricardo Pepe. Though he had been on the 59-man preliminary roster for the Gold Cup, and he was also on the bench for games 1 and 2 in this qualification set. For most, he came completely out of the blue, and game 3 was his first cap. Josh Sargent was the sorry, I'll just catch up with the graphics we have for our YouTube watchers. Josh Sargent was the centre forward in the first game, and got one more start as an outside forward in game 3, but he was off the team by game 4. As frustrating for the USA as he has been when I watch him playing for his club team Norwich. Any comments on that, Connor?
Yeah, frustrating in finishing. He certainly has had chances, for Norwich and for the States, and hasn't seemed to take them. So I think he's got a bit of work to do to kind of get himself back in that squad and maybe get his confidence up.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, but he seems to have worked himself out of a starting position now.
Yeah,
Jordan Tsubachi was next, but a 1-1 draw with Canada made that his only start, and he also was gone by game 4. Giassi Zardes started game 5. He had actually been injured for the first 3 games, and then he wasn't selected for the last 2. So they seem to be going through forwards, except for Pepe. But a lot of times, the forwards are the most subbed players. So a lot of times these forwards on the bench are quite important. Ricardo Pepe started 5 of the last 6 games, and he seems fairly ensconced in the position over a host of other candidates, many of whom were expected, but who never got the chance. And we talked about them in the initial podcast. And I'll just kind of quickly go through them here. So Jordan Morris was injured for the Gold Cup, and that injury continued through the first 6 games. He was never selected, but he actually did play a friendly that they've played since their last game. So he may be working his way back in. The Gold Cup forwards, Daryl Dike was never called up, and Matthew Hopp was called up 3 times, but only saw action in 1 game for 17 minutes. And in the first podcast, we had also speculated on Josie Altidore and Tyler Boyd. They're 32 years old and 26 years old, respectively, but neither has been selected since 2019. So quite a lot of names there. Hey.
Yeah, lots to choose from. And as you mentioned, and the 18-year-old Ricardo Pepe, who is their leading goal scorer so far, is kind of the surprise name they seem to have landed on.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, they may be disappointed with the production of those other names coming in. And it'll be interesting to see how they look going forward. We're only going to, most of the substitutes are coming from the players we've named so far. They didn't start all the games, but there are a couple of substitutes that I think deserve mention.
Yeah, Jesus Ferreira and Luca De La Torre, they've came off the bench, twice for Ferreira, once for De La Torre, but they have made appearances for them. And then in terms of new players, kind of Ricardo Pepe was someone we hadn't mentioned. We hadn't expected to be involved, but he's been quite heavily involved, as we've already seen.
Right, and I'm not sure if we are considering Musa also a new player.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I would agree. We didn't mention him, but he's also another young player that's kind of taken a leading role.
yeah, and that's about it. And I think the USA, with the problems they have, don't want to add a whole lot of new players because that would just engender more problems. Um, Noticeably absent, I would say Michael Bradley in that category, maybe Josie Altidore, and then some of the forwards from the Gold Cup.
Yeah, Matthew Hop, they were quite big on him after the Gold Cup. So I'm surprised that he hasn't got a bit more game time.
Yeah. Okay, well, let us do kind of a default lineup. As with Canada, there's probably more than 11 names here because some players are being kind of rotated. But here we go. Do you want to take us through it?
Yeah, so goalkeepers, as we mentioned, they've been using two, both Zach Steffen and Matt Turner. Zach Steffen started the last three, so he may be the starter going forward, but that's just speculation, I suppose. Central defenders, Miles Robinson seems to be the most established name, with Walker Zimmerman, Chris Richards, and Mark McKenzie all coming in. The left back position seems to be Anthony Robinson's, and right back seems to be Serginho Dest, though DeAndre Yedlin has made some appearances as well. Into the midfield, Tyler Adams is kind of firmly cemented in that central midfield role. Kellen Acosta having played as well. And then the other midfield three seem to be Kristin Pulisic, Weston McKennie, and Yunus Musa, kind of two of the three. But with Pulisic missing some through injury, we might expect to see him be more involved down the stretch. And then for forwards, their front three, which Berhalter favors, does seem to be Ricardo Pepe down the middle with Brendan Aronson and Timothy Weah on the flanks.
Right, and as we said at the beginning of the podcast, it does seem to have gelled a little bit over the last, especially the final three games. But as you say, working Kristin Pulisic back into the equation and a couple of other injured players. I think there's one central defender we mentioned, Aaron Long, who, if he recovers, will likely be part of the mix there, if not a kind of an entrenched player. Great. Well, let us look towards the future then for the last part of this podcast, and that is the upcoming games. And I think you mentioned the two next away games are Canada and Mexico, so two of the toughest teams right now. What do you make of it, Connor?
Yeah, and their last away game is in Costa Rica, so that's not easy too. They'll be difficult, and their home form has been, their away form has been kind of inconsistent. One win so far, but as you've mentioned, this is not kind of a new phenomenon for the United States. They historically are kind of inconsistent on the road. I think they'll probably pick up, sufficient points. And then their home games, they're home to El Salvador, Honduras, Panama. They are strong at home, and those are three games that they should probably win. So, they're in a good enough position. They won't need to be, perhaps stellar on the road, but, for their point, if they could go undefeated or pick up ties in those games, I think they would consider that to be positive.
I agree. I think they'll be fully expecting to get the 9 points at home. And, that in itself may be enough. But even just for psychological reasons, I think they'll want to improve their road performance, going in, especially, if they know that they are going into the World Cup. They'll want to go in with a bit of a stronger psychology than just one win on the road.
Yeah, I agree. I think 4 wins from 8 games, isn't a spectacular team or return for a team like the United States that, historically, dominates this region, or certainly does at the Gold Cup level. But that said, just the way the standings have gone, Canada's dropped points, Mexico's dropped points, so they find themselves just a point off the top. despite some of their performances and even results, not being spectacular. So they're probably where they want to be at this stage, and I don't see a huge threat for them not to qualify automatically.
Yeah, I agree. It would be, they don't want another disaster like 2018. And even though it's probably not going as well as they hope, it doesn't look like it's headed in that direction either. But you've been dancing around the question, Connor. I'm tired of it. Give it to me straight. Where is the USA going to end up here?
I think the inconsistency that they've shown will probably continue, especially with those 3 difficult road games, as we mentioned. I don't think they'll run away and finish first. I think it'll be close. I'm going to say third. I think they'll fall a little bit behind Mexico and Canada based on those difficult road games.
Yeah, I gotta say I agree. I think they'll get maybe 1 point on the road against Canada and Mexico. I don't think they can kind of rely on getting points there. But I think the 9 points at home will help. But I think Mexico will be loath to finish behind them and will really want to recover from the away loss in the USA. So I'm also picking them third. And I can't believe it. I feel shame. I feel embarrassment, humiliation that at the end of the Canada podcast, I did not ask you where Canada would end up. Your trickery deflected me from asking the question. So I'm going to do it here. Canada, O'Connor, where is Canada going to finish here?
I'm going to put Canada in second, ahead of the United States, not ahead of Mexico, who I think will recover and finish strongly. But I think it will be close. But I'm going to say Mexico first, Canada second, USA third, and then all those teams qualifying relatively comfortably in the end.
Right, we'll get to the teams below that later. But I'm going to disagree with you there. I can't believe I'm going to say it, but then you were a bit skeptical at the beginning of this thing when I think I said Canada could be third. Did I?
I think you said as high as second at one point.
Good heavens. Well, now I'm going to go as high as first because I really... it's not so much a prediction, but, well, it's a bit of a prediction. They've got a great team spirit. They've played a lot of their tough games so far. And I think they have the motivation and the spirit to win it all. So that's where I'm going to go. And if I have to fall on my sword at the end, so be it. They'll definitely be in the top 3, but I'm picking them first, Connor.
All right. Well, should be good. USA, they want to qualify. That's the main goal. Third wouldn't be great and would perhaps lead to questions about their manager's, future, which is perhaps in doubt already. So they'll want to finish strongly and will be striving to prove us wrong that they can finish first or second in this group.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, maybe we talked too much about Canada there. Sorry, I got carried away. I'll just finish the podcast by saying we do have actually a new website where we've compiled all of the podcasts that we've done so far, and that is at soccerfiles.captivate.fm. So Soccer Files is spelled soccer, SOCCER, files, all one word, PHILES. .captivate, CAPTIVATE.fm. So I hope you visit the website. And we've been recommending actually doing the first part of this podcast on players and using it in tandem with this second part. So we hope you do that and we hope you enjoy. And that brings us to the close of this podcast. You want to sign us out, Connor?
That's right. I'll see you next time.
Okay, take care. All the best.